In the early 1900s, a new element entered the public imagination: radium. Scientists treated it as proof that nature still held hidden powers, and newspapers carried the excitement far beyond the laboratory. People heard that it seemed to pour out energy on its own, day after day. To a world fascinated by electricity and modern machines, that sounded like a medical breakthrough waiting to happen. A hunger formed for cures that promised strength, youth, and drive. That hunger met a marketplace already crowded with patent medicines, bottles and powders sold on bold claims, not careful testing. Radium fit perfectly into that world. Marketers talked as if energy could be swallowed and put to work inside the body, and many customers wanted to believe it. The science was real, but the leap to everyday healing was not. And the rules around health products stayed thin, scattered and easy to dodge. So the first wave of sellers moved fast. They wrapped ordinary tonics in modern language, hinted at secret formulas, and used the word radium like a guarantee. They did not need to prove what was inside, or what it did over time. They only needed a label that sounded scientific, and a promise that felt personal. In a market built on hope, radium became a premium ingredient, and oversight barely slowed the pitch. Radium products stopped looking like fringe curiosities and started showing up where ordinary people already shopped. Drugstores carried radium tonics beside familiar remedies. Mail-order catalogues offered them as modern health aids, delivered straight to the door. The advertising stayed simple and confident, a few drops or a daily sip, and the body supposedly felt younger. Fatigue, nerves, weak appetite, even impotence, all got folded into one promise. The pitch worked because it sounded safe and almost effortless. These were not presented as harsh medicines or last resort treatments. They were presented as upkeep, a gentle boost for busy lives. Companies leaned on the glow of science without offering real proof, and buyers rarely demanded it. The products varied: bottled waters, concentrates, powders, pads, and small devices meant to charge water, but the message stayed the same: use it regularly. That regular use became the change that mattered. People did not just try radium once out of curiosity, they built routines around it: a morning dose before work, a tonic after dinner, a device on the body during sleep. It slipped into daily life like vitamins or coffee, and with each new bottle ordered and each new habit reinforced, the distance grew between what the marketing promised and what the body actually absorbed. By the time the fad matured, sellers stopped acting like back-alley peddlers and started looking like modern brands. Names, logos, and official labels appeared. Bottles promised measured strength, consistent purity, dependable results. Some products came as radium-laced water concentrates meant to be mixed at home, turning a daily drink into a ritual. Others offered a machine-like solution, sold as a smarter way to put radioactive energy in the body. The language changed too. Ads borrowed the tone of laboratories and hospitals, even when the claims rested on guesswork. Words like dose, element, and emanation sounded technical, and that was the point. Emanation gadgets claimed to charge ordinary water by releasing a radium gas into it, as if science itself did the work. Testimonials filled the gaps, stacked one after another, presented as proof that the products had been tested by real life. And then came the shift that made this more than a passing craze. Some customers did not sip these tonics once in a while. They took them again and again, chasing a stronger effect, treating them like a supplement that needed steady upkeep. Weeks turned into months. Months became years. The branding promised control and safety, but the routine quietly raised the stakes. The same small dose, repeated, stopped being small. The first damage rarely looked dramatic. It started as small mouth sores that did not quite close, a tender spot along the gums, a tooth that loosened too early. People blamed sharp foods, a lingering cold, or a rough dental cleaning. Then jaw pain settled in and stayed. At the same time, an exhaustion crept in that felt like anemia, weakness, paleness, a strange shortness of breath. Doctors treated what they could see. They called it infection. They prescribed rinses, powders, tonics, extractions. Dentists scraped and pulled, assuming poor hygiene or untreated cavities had finally caught up. Patients often sounded like the wrong kind of sick. They looked otherwise healthy, yet their mouths broke down as if they had been ill for years. And when teeth came out, the sockets sometimes refused to heal. Over time, a troubling coincidence appeared. In separate offices, physicians and dentists began encountering the same mix of symptoms: stubborn sores, jaw pain, tooth loss, and deep fatigue in people who did not fit the usual profile. It happened too often to dismiss as bad luck. Case notes started to resemble one another. Quietly, professionals compared experiences and realized they were not seeing isolated problems. They were seeing a cluster, aim. The scattered complaints began to line up into something unmistakable. Mild mouth sores did not stay mild. Teeth loosened, then fell out. The jawbone itself started to die, a condition doctors later called radium jaw. It did not act like a normal infection. The gum split open, bone showed through, and the wound refused to close. The pain stayed, the damage spread, and once it reached bone, it rarely stopped. As the illness advanced, the body seemed to come apart from the inside. Small knocks caused fractures. Bones weakened in places that should not have failed. Patients developed disfiguring holes along the jawline, and surgeons removed dead sections just to control the rot. Yet even after treatment, healing lagged or never arrived. The pattern baffled clinicians because it did not match the usual suspects: poor hygiene, syphilis, tuberculosis, or ordinary dental disease. Then early medical investigators started asking a different kind of question. Instead of searching for a germ, they looked for an exposure. These patients shared something else: a history of using radioactive consumer products, tonics, energizing waters, and other radium cures, often taken faithfully over long periods. The idea was unsettling but simple. If radium entered the body, it did not just pass through. It settled into bone, and it kept delivering damage long after the dose ended. By the mid-1920s, the warning signs stopped looking like scattered bad luck and started looking like a pattern the public could not ignore. A few well-known, well-connected tonic users wasted away in ways that sounded impossible. Teeth loosened, jaws broke down, and simple aches turned into permanent damage. Doctors described blood changes that looked like serious disease, but the common link kept resurfacing. Radium, taken for health, stayed inside the body and kept working. At the same time, another story pushed the danger into everyday headlines. Young factory workers, later known as the Radium Girls, became sick after painting watch dials with glowing radium paint and ingesting it through routine brush pointing. Their injuries echoed the tonic cases: rotting jawbone, infections that never resolved, and crushing anemia. This was no longer a private tragedy hidden in medical files. It became a public example that radiation could attack bone and blood from the inside. Once those names and symptoms appeared in print, the tone changed fast. Newspapers framed the harm as betrayal, not misfortune, and they treated the glowing products as a consumer scandal. Courts began hearing claims that companies had sold danger as vitality, and that employers had exposed workers without honest warnings. The facts still unfolded slowly, but the social shift happened quickly. radium stopped being a novelty to marvel at. It became something people demanded answers for. As the cases piled up, the fight shifted into courtrooms and back offices. Victims and families asked a simple question: who sold this and what was in it? Companies answered with denial. They blamed infections, bad teeth, bad luck, anything but the tonic. When investigators demanded formulas, manufacturers leaned on trade secret protection. They kept their ingredients vague, their labels confident, and their salesmen busy. They also leaned on doubt. The science of long-term exposure still left gaps, and the companies used every gap like a shield. If doctors disagreed, they called it unproven. If symptoms varied, they called it unrelated. And while arguments dragged on, the products stayed on the market. People still bought them for energy, for digestion, for youth, because no one had produced the one thing that cut through opinion. That changed when laboratories began doing what advertising never did: measuring. Chemists tested bottles of tonics and recorded detectable radioactivity where labels promised harmless vitality. Then doctors tested the victims themselves. Using new instruments, they found radiation signatures in breath, urine, and even inside bone. Evidence that the material stayed in the body, not just passing through. The marketing claimed benefits. The numbers showed contamination. By the time the measurements and autopsies piled up, the response finally shifted from curiosity to control. Medical associations circulated plain warnings to doctors and pharmacists, urging them to stop treating radium tonics like harmless stimulants. Regulators pushed for tighter labeling, demanding that bottles admit what they contained and drop the most reckless claims. But the system moved in patches. One town acted fast, another did nothing. Companies kept selling wherever the rules still looked soft. Pressure built through paperwork and headlines. Health departments requested samples. Inspectors compared advertised trace vitality to lab numbers that looked anything but trace. Some manufacturers tried to stay ahead of trouble by changing formulas or swapping names, hoping a new label meant a fresh start. Others leaned on delay, betting that appeals and technical loopholes would outlast the public's attention. It worked for a while. Then the market started to turn on them bottle by bottle. The turning point arrived when warnings turned into consequences. Retailers pulled products rather than risk liability, and mail-order sellers lost payment channels and shipping access as scrutiny tightened. A few well-known brands disappeared from shelves outright. Others rebranded into vague mineral or health tonics, stripping away any mention of radium to survive. The collapse looked sudden, but it had been built by slow evidence and uneven enforcement, finally landing at once. The fad shrank to a cautionary whisper. Years after the bottles disappeared from store shelves, the damage kept unfolding inside the people who had trusted them. Symptoms did not stop at bad teeth or sore jaws. Bones weakened, fractures appeared after minor bumps, and wounds refused to heal. Some victims deteriorated in slow steps, then suddenly collapsed into rapid decline. The delay confused families and even some doctors, but the pattern stayed consistent. Radiation exposure kept working long after the last dose. That long delay changed how officials thought about safety. Radiation could not be treated like a simple poison that left the body and ended the threat. It demanded limits, monitoring, and clear rules for exposure over time. Standards tightened around what counted as a safe dose, especially for anything that entered the body. Consumer protection also shifted. Labels, ingredient disclosure, and medical claims faced sharper scrutiny because the radium tonic era showed how easy it had been to sell danger as health. It also forced a harder ethical line. Experiments and treatments involving radiation required oversight, real consent, and proof that benefits outweighed risks, not marketing promises. The story of Radium Tonics became a teaching tool used in medical training, regulatory work, and public health messaging because it contained every warning sign in one case: a new science, a rush to profit, and harm that arrived quietly years later. It stayed in textbooks as a reminder that invisible risks still demanded visible responsibility. Radium tonics faded out, and they stayed gone. The bottle and brochure era of radioactive health collapsed under measurements, lawsuits, and bodies that kept breaking long after the ads stopped. What remained was a hard lesson. Radiation did not behave like a vitamin. It lodged, it accumulated, and it punished patients. That realization pushed medicine to treat radiation as a tool with a cost, not a charm with a glow. In modern care, radiation still appeared, but it moved behind rules. Hospitals used controlled doses for imaging and cancer treatment, with trained staff, calibrated machines, and limits built from decades of data. Regulators required documentation, monitoring, and clear medical purpose. The casual promise of energy no longer counted as a reason. The burden shifted. Anyone who claimed benefit had to show it, measure it, and prove that harm stayed as low as possible. Yet the old playbook persisted in new packaging. Modern wellness fads still promised simple fixes for complex problems, leaned on testimonials, and borrowed scientific language to sound inevitable. Some products stayed legal by skirting definitions, selling optimization instead of treatment, and racing ahead of enforcement. The danger rarely looked like an instant crisis. It arrived later, when injuries surfaced and blame scattered. The radium era ended, but the gap between hype and oversight remained a live risk.